Fault in Our Stars is a contemporary fictional book about living with cancer, written by John Green in 2012. This book would go on to be a bestseller for teenagers and adults alike, causing floods of them to cry on the internet about how sad it is to lose somebody you love. Only 2 years after the book's success did Hollywood pick up on this and decide to destroy its heart and soul by making a film about it. Did it make me cry? Of course not. But will there be plenty to criticise and make fun of? There jolly well should be. This is Hollywood after all, and I am aiming to prove that this film is just a mediocre love story despite the love the world seems to have for this movie. Anyway, I will now be delving into spoiler territory, so if you really care about them that much, you probably shouldn't have clicked on this video in the first. Gus dies at the end! So the film opens up with some inspirational music to really get us in the mood for romance, and Hazel talks about movies sugarcoating romantic stories. This speech isn't in the book, and I find it funny that this film has various elements of what she calls sugarcoating, despite she said this story is about reality. However, reality's portrayal in movies can be very subjective. People in the 60s thought that the new wave French cinema, with its use of black and white, long takes and non-standard forms of narrative, were to be praised for their realism. But we all know that, for the most of us, reality isn't in black and white. There's colour in it. The story of The Fault in Our Stars may reflect reality, but it certainly isn't realistic. We all know actors were hired and sets were built so this movie could be made. The events aren't happening before our eyes. That's my ramble as to why this film isn't necessarily realistic, but we'll go with what she's saying, that this could happen to somebody in real life for now. So anyway, Hazel meets her support group and her life is shit. There is more motivational acoustic guitar music playing throughout this movie, and it just isn't interesting or adding anything to the movie. It just seems like royalty-free music that was just shunted there to make it sound like another sympathetic charity advert. In the books, Hazel has a friend called Caitlin, who is rather irritating to read about because she's so busy for a high schooler that it just seems unbelievable for her to even exist. Hazel asks her for advice on Gus later on and doesn't help her whatsoever, and even in the final chapter she doesn't seem to add anything to the story whatsoever, so I'm glad she wasn't included in the film. Hazel then meets Gus, who for me was rather poorly casted, considering the two main characters are both in Divergent. Another reason he was poorly casted is that he has an awfully creepy stare. Anyway, the session finishes and Gus pops a fag in his mouth. He calls this a metaphor, stating that he doesn't allow the device of killing him to kill him, assuming he's talking about not giving in to his cancer. Now, I'm not entirely sure this is a metaphor, and I'm not proclaiming to be an expert on metaphors either, but I always knew it like this. I could metaphorically state that somebody who eats a lot is a pig. For this purpose, we could say that Gus is a dead man walking because he has cancer, but he is obviously alive and therefore can't be dead. This is a metaphor. His almost smoking just comes off as pretentious. If somebody could explain this to me better than the book does, that would be greatly appreciated. We then have a flashback describing how Hazel's cancer originated, and the sequence involving her lungs filling up with water is quite emotional and well shot with the loss of focus put in here and there. But once again, the pointless music spoils the scene like it's trying to suck the life out of me. We then find out that the name of the drug that shrunk her tumour is called phalanxiform, which is very cleverly written when you consider what this means. A phalanx would be the Greek name given to a military formation of men with spears. What's genius about this made-up drug, however, is that it gives me this beautiful image of several spikes piercing the cancer until it deflates, which is pretty cool. Hazel and Gus make their way down to his love dungeon in order to watch V for Vendetta. In the film, I guess they couldn't say which film they were going to watch in case people like me decide to stop watching The Fault in Our Stars and put on a better film. It's odd they don't watch V for Vendetta considering he has a massive poster of it behind his bed. Anyway, she begins to explain her favourite book, An Imperial Affliction, to Gus. He, to no surprise, doesn't seem to find much interest at first, but from reading The Fault in Our Stars, I feel that too much attention was being paid to this fictional book. I want to hear your story, John Green, not one that your fictional character made up. Gus agrees to reading this book, but he introduces her to an even more boring sounding book.
You will read this. This haunting yet brilliant novelization of my favorite video game.
What? Really? This is what you read in your spare time? A story that can be told through a video game you play, and yet you enjoy reading a piece of merchandise that probably tells you exactly the same story? You really do have too much money for your own good, Gus. What follows after she wakes up the next day is almost hilarious. It's basically an iPhone advert.
This is how you turn it on. This is your music. This is your email. This is the web. And this is a call on your iPhone.
We have a dinner scene, and for some reason the typing sound is heard when she reads a message. This gets very confusing because I'm not sure if she's typing these words to Gus or if what we're seeing is Gus's message. As much as the Apple product placement goes absolutely nuts in the next scene, there just doesn't need to be this tapping sound. It confuses the audience as to who's texting who. In the end, all of the texts that we see when she's at the dinner table were from Gus, instead of there being an actual conversation between the two of them. Hazel returns to Gus's house, and in the book about 3 pages is dedicated to describing what he and Isaac are doing in the fictional video game they are playing, which isn't very interesting at all. Isaac is having a bit of a hissy fit because his girlfriend broke up with him. Standard, teenagers do that. But shouting and destroying stuff while the 2 main characters are trying to have a conversation is quite annoying. It's hard to hear what they're saying, and they keep getting interrupted by him. 2 seconds ago, he wanted to do nothing but cry and play video games, a much more suitable way of taking your mind off the issue. However, what the 2 are talking about isn't very interesting anyway, because it's about the book written by a fictional character that we will never read. Therefore, we will never be able to relate to their conversation, and thus this becomes a bit of a pointless scene, apart from Gus getting the idea to contact the author about the unexpectedly incomplete book. Hazel goes home, but they simply can't get enough of each other for 5 minutes, and they have to have a phone call, in which another Apple product appears. Anyway, he proves himself the best boyfriend by getting in contact with the author of her favourite book. She freaks out like the good little nerdling that she is, and she has exactly the same laptop as he does. They decide on OK being the word that unites them, like always with Isaac and Monica, but I can't help but think that this is the most boring word you 2 could have used. Pit, tractor, thing, mixing, driver, McPhee. Hazel gets a reply from her favourite author that should she be in Amsterdam, he would be willing to have her over for a visit, which is not a direct invitation to Amsterdam as she states in the film. You'll notice Hazel's optimism for meeting Van Houten changed the words he wrote to her in the original emails, and this becomes more evident when Hazel sees Van Houten for the first time and how high her expectations are, but I'll comment more on that when we get there. In this scene also is a poster for the Hectic Glow, a fictional band that Hazel is introduced to by Gus in the books, and yet she already appears to be a fan without Gus educating her about them. In fact, apart from the poster, they aren't mentioned once. Hazel and Gus have a picnic in a park, which is very Dutch oriented because Gus is willing to take her to Holland so she can meet her favourite author. Hazel is somewhat unappreciative of his efforts for this date in the books, but it's all smiles and cheers until she gets home to tell her mum. I can't help but feel Laura Dern was cast really poorly into this role as the mother. She seems so cheery and fake that it sticks out like a sore thumb. I mean, it's hard to comment about anything good for Shailene Woodenplank and Ansel Elgort the Boring, but come on, this woman was in Jurassic Park and 3 David Lynch movies, where her performances shine in comparison to this. I reckon the executives had a conversation like this. Hey, remember that blonde chick from Jurassic Park? Yeah, she's getting really old now, but she's still super hot. Great! Let's put her in a teen movie! Stay in America, Hazel. Don't leave, Hazel. Stay on American soil, Hazel. I love being paid for your pain, Hazel. Just as things start looking up for Hazel, her lungs start filling up with water again. And this sequence would be bloody fantastic if it wasn't all in slow motion. Laura Dern looks hilarious. Her father looks ghastly right here. Could somebody please explain to me how this looks more tragic than if it was to happen at normal speed? Going back to what Hazel said about sugarcoating, I think this is a good example of this. In the book, this event involving Hazel being taken to the ICU just happens. It just happens. No slow-mo, no over-dramatization, nothing. Gus is waiting in the waiting room and there's a guy with an iPad! Hazel gets home and we see that she has deleted all of Gus's previous messages for some reason. Quite a crucial part of the book is missing from the film, and that is of Caroline Mathers, Gus's ex-girlfriend. In the book, Hazel stalks Caroline's page and sees all of the misuse and notes left on her wall. She then realizes that she too will have this effect on people when she disappears from the world. It also reinforces how egocentric comments online disguised as well wishes might not be appropriate for everyone who reads them. This is the main reason why her grenade speech is so bloody fantastic and well placed. And it's so strange that Gus's dead girlfriend isn't included, because it adds development to his character. In the film, Hazel has had nothing to provoke her into saying her grenade speech. It goes like this. Gus comes over, they sit on the swings, and she bursts out with this speech after Gus says having his heart broken by her would be a pleasure, which is quite a nice thing to say when you're not thinking about being obnoxiously metaphoric all the time. Anyway, the day arrives for the Lancasters to leave for Amsterdam, and Gus has an argument with his parents before they pick him up. Wait, hold on. Nope. It's not there. He's in a fucking limo with motivational music behind it. This is so over the top and unnecessary. Remember what we were saying about sugarcoating Hazel Grace?
Sir, there's no smoking on this plane. Or any plane.
I don't smoke.
Yeah, no, it's just a metaphor. He puts the killing thing in his mouth, but he doesn't actually give it the power to kill him.
Well, that metaphor, it's prohibited on today's flight.
When the couple are in mid-flight to Amsterdam in the book, they watch the Spartan movie 300, wherein which John Green gives out a fully fleshed review of the film from Hazel's perspective. It's a good review, I agree with most of it, but I didn't read The Fault in Our Stars to hear what you thought of a contemporary action movie, John. Instead of this review in the movie, we simply have them watching James Cameron's Aliens, followed by smiles and laughter of appreciation. I guess they couldn't talk shit about another blockbuster movie in case fanboys got worked up about his opinions, and quite rightly so. Also, both Aliens and The Fault in Our Stars are both produced and distributed by 20th Century Fox, which doesn't surprise me at all. Then we have a 15-second holiday brochure for Amsterdam played to us, with one of the worst pop songs played over the background. What does booming and clapping have anything to do with cancer or holidays to Amsterdam? It is so cringy. And it goes on for over a minute. I wonder why they put it on there. I guess they're having a great time, just like when I danced to this song in the club. Woo! We have some more appalling acting from Laura Dern, and Hazel then decides what to wear for her romantic day and night out with Gus. They go on a boat ride and Hazel gets really fucking excited about going under a bridge on a boat. When they reach the restaurant, oh my God, even the waitress has a bloody iPad. Why not just have the Apple logo in the middle of the screen for the entirety of the movie? A Dutch waiter comes along and serves them champagne, and this is the only time the title of the film is mentioned. And even then, it's got nothing to do with the stars being faulty. What I don't quite understand as well is that these three have travelled to Amsterdam and none of them decide to smoke a joint in the time they are there. There's medical marijuana for your illnesses, and it's perfectly okay to smoke and buy it there. Hazel said earlier in the film that she wanted to smoke pot, so this is her perfect chance. You've already given her a limousine, 2 free meals and champagne at a fancy restaurant. Why not just let them have a smoke to finish it all off? Excuse me, but this film is made for teenagers actually, and it would immediately make them want to smoke illegal substances if our relatable characters were to do the aforementioned activities. Oh, piss off, Brian. I've already stopped you from doing those shitty book differences that you did in my Harry Potter review, and now you have to complain about this shit? About weed? You can show people killing each other on screen in the most horrific ways, but young people don't go and kill their best friends, do they? Jesus Christ. Gus has to make his love for Hazel known by making a big speech about how he's gonna be forgotten when he's dead, but in the book this speech is said on the plane after the build-up of adrenaline from Gus's first flying experience. Why is it said here in the restaurant? After dinner, just in case you couldn't get enough of Amsterdam already, here's some more shots they took whilst they were there. Anyway, here comes my issue with Van Houten and telling Hazel anything she has questions about. Not once in any of Van Houten's email did he actually say he would answer any of her questions. He only said he would open his door to them for a visit.
But you promised!
No, he didn't. Trust me, I've read the book. Alright, it was a bit dickish to assume that they wouldn't ever show up in case they died, but Hazel thinks she's so entitled to know everything that Van Houten hasn't even thought about. If an imperial affliction ends where it does, so be it. It doesn't matter what the Tulip Man or the mother did after the main character died. It doesn't matter. Just deal with it. I will never know if Jimmy Savile ever touched all those kids he apparently did because he's dead. Sad, I know, but we deal with it. Death is conclusive, just leave the dead to rest. Willem Dafoe now brings forward possibly the best scene in the entire movie. I like Dafoe's performance because he isn't as forcefully optimistic about the world as every other character is. He says things as they are, albeit he says it with the intent of hurting their feelings, and he is quite a dick to them. But the set design of the house is finally not representative of the false happy American lifestyle. It's black and white, just like the way he explains things. He begins acting very pretentiously when he starts playing Swedish hip-hop, probably to mess with them and probably because he's a drunk. He then talks to them about their self-entitlement coming from the way they're brought up, which is a valid point. They are considerably spoilt. Should we treat every other child with a fatal illness with overindulgence on the planet? Where is this money going to come from? All these things need to be considered if this judicial system for people with these diseases is going to be put in place. They leave his house in an outrage and his assistant takes them to the Anne Frank Museum. I don't quite understand what happens here because the Anne Frank Museum is busy as hell. How did they skip the queue and just get in? Looking from this shot here, this line looks like the queue for people with pre-booked tickets, and this queue looks like the line for people who are buying tickets to get in. Is this another cancer perk that they can just skip the queue into the museum? It's not said in the book or film. How did they get the tickets in the first place? Have hours passed whilst they waited to get in? I don't think they'd wait that long just for Leadavai to check if it had disabled access and then proceed to go in anyway. This is bullshit. Just look at all these people! Despite the ridiculousness of their entry, I do think this sequence is rather touching. Seeing a character brought down to her lowest by a flight of stairs, and Woodley's performance is probably at her best here in the film. I will say that reading this segment was a lot more interesting though, because the pain and unease she is feeling is better described than just watching a character suffer. The description in the book details the mechanics of her failing lungs instead of just describing her behaviour, which is all we can really see from the film. So they kiss in the museum, fuck in the bedroom, and then they're downstairs eating breakfast on their final day in Amsterdam. We have a rather touching moment between Gus and Hazel when he announces that he has tumours across his body. I'd be able to sympathise with him more if we had the sections with Caroline, but all I get from him in the film is that he's just smiles, charms, and six-pack man. They arrive back on good old American soil, and their father comes and meets them at the airport. The father cries an awful lot in the book, which is just part of his character, and it's probably missed out in this movie because, oh yeah, Hollywood males don't cry. They're manly and strong. I know, Gus cries, but he's not a man yet. He'll get there when somebody writes him some development, for God's sake. Okay, so Hazel's background Gus's for more adolescent fun, and we have this really stupid segment with Isaac's ex-girlfriend Monica. So Gus, who is rich as hell with his lovely house and gamer chairs, can't afford $5 for the eggs he's gonna throw at Monica's house. Besides that though, I do understand Monica's a bitch for not staying in touch with Isaac. This does not, however, justify egging her house. Do you guys know how hard it is to clean eggshells and yolks off things? And what a waste of eggs! I'm a frugal piece of fruit, and I would like to slap all three of them on the wrist for wasting all those good eggs they threw. And for what? So you can feel good about yourselves? Pathetic. A side note, When Isaac throws his egg in his hand behind him, it bounces! I never knew eggs did that! After that incident late into the night, Gus drives out to a gas station for cigarettes. He's not going to smoke them anyway, so why does he even bother? Not only that, but it was stupid for Gus to ring Hazel, a cancer patient, and not his parents when you consider that they are probably better equipped for situations like this. Hazel doesn't need this stress put on her, and yet he says he will never forgive her if she does call somebody who's better prepared to take him home. What a selfish moron! I have no sympathy for your actions here, Augustus, book or film. Augie then comes out of the hospital and still looks healthy as hell. He just needs to wash his hair a bit. He then gets put in his place by Hazel about not being grateful for the life he's been given back at the skeleton playground. We then have a cringy pre-funeral where Gus hears Isaac and Hazel tell their eulogies. Isaac's is nice about not wanting to see a world without him because he's blind, and Hazel's is convoluted and pretentious. You can't have bigger infinities than other infinities because that's the point of infinity. It can't be counted. So by saying one is bigger than the other is stupid, considering that infinity, by definition, is valueless. Gus dies in the ICU 8 days later, and Van Houten shows up at his funeral, which seems to take forever to get through. This is probably to draw out the depressing funeral for all those fangirls who probably suffered as much heartbreak as Hazel did in the books. Anyway, Van Houten basically has his character fleshed out a bit more when we find out his own daughter died of cancer, which gives way for a little bit more sympathy. When she drives away, I can hear a sad piano song playing. I'm also happy that this story doesn't have the cliche marriage or pregnancy event. So many American stories have pregnancies and marriage as if they are the greatest plot twists to ever happen to anyone. Despite both can cause great upset and potentially become financial disasters in the long run. Thankfully, neither are even mentioned in the film, so well done, I guess. We have some more sympathy from family and friends, and then Hazel opens the letter Van Houten gave to her. We then have a montage of the entire film summarized with more motivational indie music. Most were probably just deleted scenes that they shoved in there, but holy crap, this last part is just so uninteresting to watch! Like, what he's saying is nice, but the music and images are just too annoying to be able to focus on what he's saying. And then the film ends. So, did it suck? The bottom line is just read the book. The film is not worth your time. It feels so much like a money grab that it becomes really painful to watch. The story itself is okay, albeit it has a few inconsistencies that I've already outlined. The acting is unbelievably dull, apart from maybe Willem Dafoe. So unless you love the cast or are very susceptible to crying over movies, this is probably for you. If not, give this a miss. I give this film a 3 out of 10.